with a session that we've called the Neuro's Next Leap, from today's breakthroughs to future discoveries. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Wiesje van der Flier, who is executive director at Alzheimer, Nederland. So Wiesje, warm welcome, yes. Stéphanie Debette, executive director of the Paris Brain Institute, also a partner of the summit. And Stéphanie Lacour, vice president of EPFL in Lausanne. Warm welcome.
So I think we missed the jingle with some music, but what can you do, right? You can't have everything in life. So the neuro breakthroughs. We started the summit discussing health economics and discussing the socioeconomic impact, because it is the brain economy summit. But this discussion would never be complete without going back to science. And this is what we're going to do in this session, exploring where we are at this point in time and what could be ahead of us. And I would just start by recalling very vividly a conversation I had with a friend a few years ago who said, well, neuroscience is like physics in the 19th century, namely, it's just ahead of its most meaningful discoveries. To me, it feels like we are in the breakthrough period, so it may well be that top period for physics that my colleague was talking about. But I would like to go through a little bit what all that entails. So I have a framed Economist article from 2022 that spoke about the renaissance of neuroscience. And the term renaissance, I think, is quite appropriate and appealing in many ways, because it does install a degree of positivity in it. And there was a good overview of what's happening in the field, but I wanted to ask you about what you would point out towards as the most meaningful developments. Broadly speaking, they had to do with the tools and the means on the one hand, so imaging, optogenetics, what have you, neuropixel, the ability to study thousands and hundreds of thousands of neurons at the same time in different regions of the brain. That, to a neuroscientist from 20 years ago, I think, would be completely fantasy, right? So technologically, the means have improved. Also, understanding has improved. So the Economist article spoke a lot about neuroplasticity and how understanding of neuroplasticity now creates the types of insights which take us into new territories. So let me start with this really open question first to all three of you about now what you would single out if you were to write an update to that Economist article from 2022. What would be at the center of your focus? I don't know who wants to go first.
We go left to right?
Yeah,
right
please,
to
please.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to go for one single thing. No, I think when we think about the brain, and that's the topic of today's symposium, the brain is our best organ, our most beautiful organ, but it's also our most protected organ. And not only the skull and the meninges, but particularly the blood-brain barrier make it so difficult to reach the brain for medications, but also for scientists. And it's really all these technologies that have been developing over the past years and decades. And I think about genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, where we can really, in full detail, see what's happening, learn how these diseases, where they come from, how they develop, so that ultimately we can stop them. But also the fact that we can measure these processes in vivo using biomarkers, but also imaging, that we can actually see the processes of the diseases going on in the brain has been of such importance. And I think the third thing that I would like to say is the fact that we are getting to understand how we can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. And this is also of particular importance for medications. and which will be very helpful and very promising, I think.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So greater accessibility to the brain, crossing the blood-brain barrier. Stéphanie?
No, I can only concur with Wiesje, but I think also concur with you, Pavel, that we really get the feeling that we are somewhere on the verge of some breakthroughs, and perhaps it's a convergence of things. So the convergence of major progress, I think, in fundamental neuroscience, together with technological breakthroughs, some of which you've mentioned, which probably is the greatest leap in the past decade. And a third element, which perhaps needs to be updated based on 2022, which is the very rapid progress of AI, which will now help us to integrate all of these dimensions that we are able to generate through the technology. It's a major challenge, but I think we have witnessed in the past months and probably since 2022 major progress in that field that will certainly help us accelerate things considerably and help us understand more the brain biology and perhaps help us define the entities of brain diseases better based on mechanistic grounds, which has not been the case for a long time. Also help us predict the progression and also complications better. And I think also what these technological changes have enabled us is also to create new types of treatments. And that is also something fairly recent. I think it's also the convergence of breakthroughs in genomics in particular and new types of treatments, all these programmable therapies that enable to generate DNA, RNA-based therapies, gene therapies, even though initially they are targeting rare diseases or individuals with rare conditions, they have a huge potential to transform previously intractable brain disorders. So.
Brilliant. And Stéphanie?
All right, so it's the hard role to be the last one to talk, because now you've also mentioned quite a few things. But I think also as the engineer on the panel, I think an aspect that is very important is so you've mentioned that there has been substantial progress in the way we can record information from the brain, in particular using advanced techniques like microelectrodes. You mentioned the neuropixel. I think these are very good breakthroughs. However, if you look at how they've been translating to clinical application, this invasive technology remains still very niche and also very much focused at the moment onto actually modulating the brain, so stimulating the brain rather than reliably recording it over time. And so this is, I think, in terms of upcoming breakthrough, we have to actually, a lot of people today are talking about BCI, brain-computer interfaces, but without reliable long-term recording technologies, this is not going to work if we want to aim for implantable technologies. And I think one big challenge that is associated with this, and I think we see an emerging work today also in improved models to test these technologies and to evaluate technologies, is also the development of brain organoids. A big challenge that we have when you develop implantable technologies is that the models you have access to are not the ultimate target. We're not using human tissue, or very rarely human tissue, and there's an opportunity with brain organoids which are constructed from cells emanating from humans, that we could also fast forward some of this transition.
Right, so these are revolutionary changes which already deliver and will deliver results, but I don't want us to look at things entirely through the rosy spectacles, so to say, because we also need to be aware of I think the limitations of the current point in time. And what I have in mind in particular is what some authors in a recent Nature article pointed out, namely that in their mind, and we can discuss whether that's right or not, too much of the clinical trial effort goes too quickly into areas without a proper understanding of the biological mechanisms of disease, right? So, of course, serendipity has played a role in medicine probably from its very beginning. In psychiatry, there are often discussions if all the mainstream drugs have been discovered by serendipity or not, or some have been based on the understanding of the biological mechanism. But of course, the trend should be to go in that direction. Now, how justified do you think this criticism that was voiced in Nature is? Stéphanie, Debette, and Wiesje, I would particularly address this question to you.
Okay, I could start. So no, I think it was a really interesting paper. I'm not sure that the sort of what you just said and really applies to the three therapies that were described, which are GLP-1 agonists, TREM2 targeting, and I think the other one was anti-tau therapies, and so. One of the main arguments that was brought up by the authors was that there was a lack of human evidence of causal implications, which may partially be the case, but I think there are commonalities in these failed trials that perhaps are more broadly in the field of dementia a general problem currently. And that apply also to these trials, which I think is, first of all, the timing of intervention, which wasn't referred to in that article. And often I think, and this was discussed also in one of the earlier panels, we are starting the trials much too late when disease is already irreversible. And I think that was a common issue here. Another thing is that although, we do understand, actually it was not only serendipity, we did understand what these different drugs were doing, but often they don't act in isolation because dementia is often a multifactorial condition where many biological mechanisms act in conjunction, and in some instances, perhaps multi-targeted therapies may be the future and would lead to better results. So it's a very complex question. Also, perhaps the way patients are targeted. The GLP-1 agonist was a great idea, actually, but in the end, it was given to patients who had already a clinical diagnosis of dementia, of AD, actually, in quite advanced disease, and you would expect with a drug that is targeting the metabolism in particular that this may act perhaps strongly on the vascular contribution to dementia, but probably these patients weren't so much included in these trials, or at least we don't exactly know. So there are multiple factors, and certainly it's thought-provoking, this article, I think.
Wiesje?
Yeah, so I also think this is a really interesting problem they propose, and I would like to make two comments. Actually, one is there's a reason that drug development has these stages. You start with preclinical evidence and then move from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 trials. And indeed, we have seen too many examples where they skipped from phase 1 to phase 3, and this has led to failure repeatedly. So there is a reason, and this path should be followed. But then I would also like to turn around the argument, because I think it is exactly because we have now a better biological grasp and measures that we can actually measure the biology in vivo, for example, for amyloid, like biomarkers for amyloid, that has really helped us to find now the first generation of medication that actually has clinical benefit. So in the end, it's about clinical benefit. We need to understand the biology. We also need to see whether that medication actually has target engagement. And I think that is very helpful. And for the examples that are being mentioned, there is, of course, measures to measure tau. But for the inflammation, which we for sure think is a very important pathway in Alzheimer's disease, it's still very difficult to measure in an individual patient what the inflammatory status is and whether the medication actually showed target engagement. And I have big expectations for the future. So rather than say we need to reorganize, we need to be pessimistic about this, I would say, yes, we are on the pathway forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I invite questions and comments as I did from the very beginning. So please let me know if you would like to speak. But I would now like to take what you just said into the funding arena, because very often the reason why the funding in the neuro space is not as pronounced as elsewhere, I mean, oncology is the obvious point of reference, is because there are few advanced, mature biomarkers, and because research is, frankly, too expensive also, right, to be conducted. So, I mean, what do you think needs to happen for that funding stream to be increased, and can the way that science is done and the way that clinical trials are done help to encourage more of the incoming funding?
Yeah, so if I can also answer to that, Pavel, because I really like that you bring up here the comparison with oncology, the field of oncology and the field of brain health. And there seems, in my view, there seems to be a misunderstanding that the oncology, there has been investment and that has led to a huge return on investment, and that's different in brain health. Because I think the investments in brain health are really very small compared to what has been invested in oncology. And also I think the balance between trials that had a negative result and had a positive result is not better in oncology. So my cry out would be invest in brain health, because the more we invest, the sooner we will have medications that work. And yes, we need to focus on trials with clever design and make sure that we kill the targets early that are not going to work, and that we move on quickly with the targets that are going to be beneficial to patients.
Thank you so much. Stéphanie, Debette, I need to make this distinction given that we have two Stephanies on stage. In January, you hosted a thoroughly impressive first World Brain Health Forum in Paris. And one of the conclusions I vividly remember from that discussion is a plea for more interdisciplinarity in the fields. And overcoming defragmentation, I think was the term I looked up in my notebook. This was also about neurology and psychiatry working more closely together, given the mechanisms of disease. But how would you see that agenda really being advanced in practical terms?
Thanks so much. So maybe also coming back to what Wiesje just said, that I think indeed if you look at the disability-adjusted life years caused by brain diseases, it's actually much higher than cardiovascular disease or cancer. And like you said, the investment in research is considerably lower. And I think one of the needs is probably that we speak with one voice. So that was maybe from the defragmentation point of view, one important outcome is that if we have a fragmented way of speaking about mental health on one side, then neurological disease on the other side, substance use disorders separately, then it becomes extremely difficult to follow and to really capture the importance of a global investment. And so that's a first important thing, is to really speak with one voice, and the brain economy voice is part of that as well. And a second aspect is that we actually also need that to better understand what are the common risk factors, common consequences of neurological, psychiatric conditions, mental health, brain health. These are very strongly intertwined. We already know some shared risk factors. We know that psychiatric disorders often are the first expression of some late onset neurodegenerative diseases, and then brain disease, neurological diseases predisposed to psychiatric disorders, etc. So it's tightly intertwined, and understanding that will help us also better redefine maybe the boundaries and the sort of the taxonomy of brain diseases. And this breaking down silos also applies, I think, to looking at the occurrence of disease across the lifespan, because we now also know that the diseases are the consequence of many, many factors, be they genetic, social, environmental, that all act in conjunction and starting very early on, in fact, in the prenatal period. And so having this holistic approach is important also to understand the early predictors and be able to implement better prevention. And finally, I think there were two other dimensions in that breaking down silos. So one of them was to break down silos across sectors. And this is great in this audience here that you have brought together really many sectors. And this is so important. It was also said in the first panel that we need scientists to speak to investors and investors to speak to scientists. We need to understand each other between these worlds. And this is very, very important. And the last silo to break is, I think, across borders and continents. And, we've heard it a little bit also this morning, but we really want to emphasize, and that was also a theme in that conference that actually had also the director of WHO, UNESCO, and former Secretary General of the United Nations speak, that it's really important to consider that already now, I think the vast majority of Delhi's disability-adjusted life years from brain disorders, I think over 80% are in the global south, and this will further increase in the years to come. And so we need to consider all of these innovations and so on, that we have to keep in mind that they also, think about reducing inequalities in brain health at the same time and not enhancing these discrepancies across borders. So a lot of barriers to break, and a lot of silos to bring down. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the issue of the Global South, because of course this is the European Brain Economy Summit, but we need to vividly keep in mind that the real challenge is in the Global South. The numbers you cited are a testimony to that, coupled with now incredibly frustrating data about access to care. If you have one neurologist per million or 2 million of population, how on earth can you go about in a systemic fashion by organizing interventions that have an impact? I'm looking around, yes, and there are a couple of questions. So if we could have the mic before we move to neurotechnology. So here, please, if you could. Oh yes, Suzanne. Yes.
Yeah, Suzanne Dixon, President of the European Brain Council. So I'm standing here as a neuroscientist, and I absolutely love this conversation. You've made great points about comparisons with cancer, about the great need for investment in good clinical trials in killing early targets. I just wanted to say there's a stage before that, and it opens up this issue that we have, that the brain is so incredibly complex. We're talking of something like 900 or more diseases and disorders of the brain. And in the field of psychiatry, we don't even know the biology for most of this, and we don't even know why drugs work. So I think we shouldn't forget the essential and absolutely first step in all of this is to heavily invest in neuroscience and build a capacity in Europe that drives a really strong community of future researchers, of people that really understand, try to get to the bottom of this. How does the brain work? I am a neuroscientist, as I say, truly don't know how the brain works. I'm working on it. But, there's so many fundamental questions, and it's so incredibly complex. The investment needs to be so much greater. So that was my comment, just to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Extremely relevant. We have one more comment and question, and then two more on the other side. So if you could raise your hand a little bit. Yes, that's it.
So thank you very much. My name is Golnaz, and 15 years ago I was a neuroscientist in the lab working on amazing technologies. Today I'm a venture capitalist. We invest in brain tech. And when we were in the lab, like many researchers I see here, we really didn't know how to talk capital, how to even find the investors. Okay, applying for grants was one side, but how to speak the language. And then the venture capitalists, today that I look back, when I talk to them, everything is very early. And the moment that they reach to us, it is 7 years already past the patent. So that that case investable is a challenge. And I'm actively looking for brain technologies for my passion, but making it investment cases in Europe sometimes is difficult. And this is my question to you. In your research centers, how do you enable your young scientists, the future entrepreneurs, to bridge this gap from breakthroughs to actually discoveries and economy? There is a gap, we know, and we love to feel it, but sometimes they are not ready.
Yeah, brilliant question. Let's maybe collect the other two, if we could. Isabel, did you have a question? No? Next? Yeah? No?
I am Sharbani again. As I'm listening to this, I want to make the connection to the morning discussion. And I think focusing on brain health or brain economy is a fundamental shift in how we do things. I've been working on NCDs my whole life, and one of the things that I've seen is the fragmentation, including in cancer. There are many, many, many initiatives, but that big moonshot does not happen. And I think just a comment, we should avoid that in brain health. Maybe you need a CERN for brain health. You need something that pushes things through public-private partnerships that helps us make that leapfrog. And then I'm looking to all of you and saying, do you think we can do that? And what would it take to convince policymakers?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And maybe the last question before coming back here. Yes, please. So if you could, yes, keep on raising your hand.
Some exercise.
exercises.
Thank you so much. I'm Sophie. I'm also a neuroscientist, so I worked across Europe, specifically the UK and the APAC region, so Thailand and Australia. And my question is, there's so many exciting things in the brain health space, so many new technologies, but what can we do for the human to really flourish? Because let's say someone has a comorbidity with depression and addiction and, for instance, also loneliness, and we have one technology that specifically focuses on depression, the person will not be quote-unquote fixed with that new technology. So how can we have that holistic approach to really make everything better in a way?
Okay, wonderful. That's a very rich set of questions. Would you like to answer any of those at the moment?
Maybe I can take the one on the VC and the entrepreneurship. So EPFL is a technical university, so we have a lot of technological innovation that emanates from our labs, even from our master student. And you're absolutely correct in saying that the scientists usually are not well trained to become entrepreneurs because this is not part of our curriculum. And so efforts that we have implemented in EPFL is really to have a structure where those who are aiming or are thinking of becoming entrepreneurs, we actually have support program where they can apply for a couple of years, either during the PhD program or after their graduation, where they can start thinking of what is a business plan, what is the type of package they need to put together, and then being exposed at different entrepreneurs that have been through the field themselves and dialogue. So it's a mini starting point. It's probably not enough to go to complete VCs, but it's a point. And then specifically in the neuro domain, a few years back in Geneva, EPFL together with the University of Geneva and the hospital in Geneva had decided to join forces into one center called the Campus Biotech, where there we also have been joined by sort of public-private partnerships, and in particular the Wiesje Center, and we have Erwin here, who's a director who is also here. The Wiesje Center is now also on campus, and so together with the academic community, together we are there to actually exchange ideas and identify also what are the ideas that could be pushed forward. And so the fact that, and to bring what you were saying before, breaking the silos, bringing people together and complementarities, I think an essential element is to bring people together in one location. Of course, we can do a lot through Zoom and etc. now, but actually nothing beats the fact that you can actually have a coffee with someone next door. And I think it takes time because nobody talks the same language. So to start with, in the neurotech domain, it's a highly interdisciplinary. We're talking a lot about neuroscience today, but actually you also need the engineers, you also need the computer scientists, now AI specialists, and none of them speak exactly the same language. And so by bringing them also together and training the next generation of students also to be sort of accustomed to these multiple languages will also facilitate bringing forward more concrete ideas to applications.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Very briefly, perhaps, I think Switzerland has a fantastic ecosystem, I think, for innovation we were just discussing before. We do have also at the Paris Brain Institute the sort of a very strong support for innovation, entrepreneurship. We have a Brain to Market summer school that we host annually, and so many initiatives in that space. I would also like to come back to the comment that was made on the importance of science, and I think definitely investment in science needs to encompass and very prominently fundamental science, fundamental neuroscience, and even sort of curiosity-driven science that, as we know, historically has led to often the greatest discoveries that have been the greatest game changers for therapeutic developments as well. And on the public-private partnerships, this is so important, I agree, but it's also so complex. On a very small scale, we've been commissioned a consensus statement on how to accelerate the development of new therapies for a very common condition that doesn't have any specific drug yet, which is called small vessel disease, cerebral small vessel disease. It affects hundreds of millions of people. It's also a major contributor to dementia, to stroke. And we noticed in that process, we really included not only academic researchers, but also people from industry and so on, but we don't necessarily speak the same language. So it's a whole process. And we also noticed in that development that it's not enough to include the academic researchers and the pharmaceutical industry. We also need regulators to be involved in that discussion, because often some of the hurdles are at that level as well. So it's quite an intricate, complex problem, and probably we need use cases where we really go in depth into the question of this partnership.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Wiesje? Yes?
Of
Yeah,
course.
great,
I think
great,
these were
please.
wonderful comments that were being made. And when I was listening, I think they also really show the full complexity of the field. So yes, we do need to invest in neuroscience. But we have to have this entire pipeline. Make the new discoveries, then make sure they can become a startup, scale-ups. And I think your comment really refers also to the Draghi report, which was published in the EU, which shows that the fact that this is a European problem, EU-wide problem, not only a brain problem, that we're not that good in starting up and then scaling up all these wonderful innovations that we have here in the EU. And then once you have the first startup scale-ups, it's about the whole fragmentation, which was also, you mentioned it as well. And I sometimes have the feeling that in the brain community we may be a little bit modest perhaps, and not so proud of what we have achieved yet. And then in the end, instead of working together, we're going to say, well, those of lifestyle, we don't like them. Those of the medication, we don't like them. Or those are psychiatry, they are neurology. We all need to work together. And then to end with your point, we will not come to a point where we solve everything at one stage, at one time. But we may take steps. And I'm sure that today we're in the stage where we are taking the first steps, and we're going to take next steps as well. And then it's going to be better and better, and we're going to have a brain-healthy continent here.
Perfect. That's something to remember from today. Now, I would like to spend a moment, Stéphanie, Lacour, discussing neurotechnology, because neurotechnology needs to be seen as part of brain health. I mean, goes all the way back to the nature of the brain as a network of adaptive circuits. So if the circuit is broken, you need to fix it. The metaphor of road being blocked, I think, is the one to be used. But also neuroplasticity increasingly points in that direction. The German startup Cortec, which works on rehabilitation after stroke, is an example of an effort, to build on neuroplasticity through BCI, through neurotechnology. So, but how much do you think there is recognition already out there of the role that neurotechnology plays in brain health?
So there is some recognition. This is very sophisticated technology, whether we're talking about wearables or non-invasive technology or invasive technology. These are really pieces of engineering that require a very expensive industry behind to actually design, manufacture them. So they currently are primarily a Western world luxury, right? That's something to also be very much aware of. And you brought the Global South, and I think their neurotechnology need to also rethink a little bit how really and who are the patients that will benefit from these. Neurotechnology today is very much also based on innovation that was produced maybe 40 or 50 years ago. The initial neuroprosthetic device is a cochlear implant. And if you look at the element of the cochlear implant, which are metallic electrodes driven by implantable stimulator that communicates with sound encoding, the technology has not much evolved until now. And so there's currently a boom around brain-computer interface, and this is mostly, I think, driven by two factors. The first one is that AI is, of course, becoming an important player, and recording information reliably from the brain and decoding information reliably, and in order to use it for an action, whether you do modulation or whether you drive a prosthesis, is actually something that is difficult to do without AI until now. So I think that's one of the major effects that comes into play. And then the second effect is also the global competitiveness. Today, the US and China are very much leading the BCI world. And they do this by it's not because, and European, we actually have the idea, we have very much of the very innovative technologies, but we have not invested in it. And this is really, unfortunately, what we see today. The US and China have developed massive industry to actually fund and support and take risk. And I think here in Europe, we're a little behind because we're a bit risk adverse. For good reason often, because you have to be cautious with the regulatory aspect. But that's a reality. Yeah, so I think, I don't know if you want to say more than that.
To your point, China published not so long ago a roadmap 2030 on brain-computer interfaces where they want to be a global leader, as in many other things in the past 20 years.
Well, and they authorized the first BCI device, implantable device, a couple of weeks ago.
Right, right. So the question then becomes, how do we strategize and how do we scale? Mm-hmm. Scaling, I think, is important because cochlear implant, which you mentioned, that's 1 million patients globally. Deep brain stimulation, about 240,000. So sizable, but not massive. And then a lot of the current projects are by nature of the process, single patients, right? Yeah. So how do we take neurotechnology solutions to scale?
So again, the two examples you gave are also neuromodulation technologies. So we know very well how to write into the nervous system, but we don't know how to record reliably. And I think this is where the innovation is really, really needed on multiple elements. We need new materials to actually better adapt to the biology or integrate with the biology, in particular here talking about implantable devices. We need miniaturization because we need to have high resolution recordings that are also stable over time. We need miniaturized embedded electronics, because today many of the electronic hardware for BCI is actually still outside of the body. And this is not going to take the technology to the home because the patient cannot actually have and carry the device. And how do we scale? That means we actually need to have facilities that also allow us to produce and actually de-risk these technologies. Today there's a huge opportunity by bridging or picking on all of the innovation that has been driven in microelectronics. A lot of the chip design manufacturing approach are now used to produce brain-computer interfaces with thin film technologies, with super advanced microchips that are embedding AI as well. And so we can leverage all of these competencies. The challenge is that we don't have a regulatory body that has approved this type of manufacturing till now. The US are starting to do this, Asia as well. So in Europe, I think this is really, we have to, before it was mentioned, the CERN of neuroscience, we also need a CERN of neuroengineering in a sense, so that we can scale, test new material, test new manufacturing, so that we can validate also their stability. Because it's one thing to have one BCI exciting paper in one of the leading journals, but it's N equal 1. It doesn't tell you that you can actually manufacture those devices reliably and for thousands of patients. So it is possible, we do need to bring expertise together to manufacture these devices.
Right, that's a very important point, which is often overlooked, right? That you need facilities for small-scale production to start with, and then, of course, for scaling of these devices. Now, moving to the Alzheimer's disease space, Wiesje, the word which one often hears in discussions is that we are at the tipping point. That expresses a sense of optimism, and yes, there are new treatments slowing the progression of the disease. There are the blood-based biomarkers, over 180 clinical trials going on as we speak, different hypotheses being tested, pre-symptomatic patients as well, so that is moving everything much more upstream. Now, how much optimism versus realism one should have when following these developments?
So I would say the answer to both questions is yes, so we should have a lot of optimism coupled to a lot of realism. So yes, in my view, we are at a tipping point. We do have these biomarkers that allow us to identify the disease in living patients and also before they are in the stage of dementia. We do have the first disease-modifying treatments that actually bend the curve of accumulating pathology, and that translates into a modest clinical benefit. We also have to be realistic that this will only benefit a small subgroup of patients. And rather than saying that's a problem, I think it's a good thing that in the Alzheimer's field we start with personalized medicine. We are not going to start with expensive medications and treat all and then find out it doesn't work. No, it's for a specific subgroup of patients. And when you realize how large and how complex Alzheimer's disease is, it's a no-brainer that there will never be one silver bullet. There will never be one treatment that fixes the whole disease. And when you realize that actually from the first disease processes in the brain until onset of the dementia, that may take 20 years. When you realize that, then actually the question whether the cascade of events in between, in those 20 years, will be similar in each patient, that question is a rhetoric question. No, it's not. There will be subgroups, there will be different disease processes, and actually the novel technologies which we discussed allow us to start identifying those subgroups, and we have now identified molecular subtypes of Alzheimer's disease. And it's very logical that each of these subtypes would need different treatment strategies, and perhaps there will also be combination of therapies. But the most important thing to mention here is that we are at a bend in the curve. We are taking the bend. We are going around the corner. We are moving towards a future where we can do more for Alzheimer's disease.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Wiesje. You mentioned the complex pathology and the different hypotheses which translate into multimodal therapies. And Stéphanie, Debette, you also spoke about multimodal therapies before. I suppose in the context of cerebrovascular disorders, which you've worked on most closely, that is the case. Can you tell us a little bit more about the implications for the healthcare systems, which is, of course, of major interest to us in this summit?
Thanks very much. And maybe even in relation with dementia, because I think for a long time the vascular contribution to dementia has been overlooked. It's part of that complexity, and it's one of the parts that has been most overlooked, I think. And now there's a wide recognition that the vast majority of dementia cases are due to a mix of different types of Alzheimer and vascular pathology. And I think we have lots of missed opportunities. First of all, it's one of the reasons why, like you said, Wiesje, some of these results from trials are not necessarily generalizable, because often patients who were included in these trials were selected to be free of at least a large amount of vascular brain disease, and therefore it's very difficult then to scale this up to the whole population, because those drugs haven't been tested in that setting. A second problem is that we are missing a prevention opportunity very strongly, and it was also said earlier, amongst the factors that we can modulate that predispose to dementia, vascular factors are probably the most prominent and the most easily modifiable. But also we know that in particular you can detect now with brain imaging technologies, and you often actually serendipitously detect vascular brain lesions that are often due to the cerebral small vessel disease I was mentioning, but nothing is generally done about it. Although this would be a major tool to actually intervene and monitor also whether the interventions slow down the progression of the disease and can eventually contribute to preventing dementia. Even on the global scale, we have here Tavia Evans, who has worked a lot on low-field MRI, which enables to scale up also the detection of these vascular brain lesions in the global south, so eventually will enable. It's just in the beginnings of these developments. And the third element is that we also begin to see that having coexisting vascular brain disease also modifies response to the treatments and leads to, for instance, certain types of vascular brain disease lead to more severe complications of some of these new anti-amyloid Alzheimer's therapies. So there's a whole range of things that we haven't yet really accounted for that have, I think, major impact.
Thank you so much. So my last question to all of you would be in connection with what's coming up in the innovation session in a moment. And that is the question of the moonshots in the neuro space. Moonshot is a term that is now used in planning for the next European Union research framework program. There is no moonshot related to the brain on the current list. So if our innovation speakers then tackle this question later, what grounds in science should they be thinking about and taking into account when they formulate these ambitious new drives? Please, Wiesje.
Yeah, can I say my own moonshot? Because that's
please,
easy.
Please share
it's a no-brainer.
3 moonshots to come.
My moonshot would, of course, be a world without dementia.
Yeah.
And for that, we need a really brain-strong EU with investments in neuroscience, with opportunities for scale-up and moving on and making sure that we have not only the medications, but also people really strengthened to realize what they can do to promote their own brain health.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So the world without dementia. Stephanie?
It's a difficult question. I investigated a little bit about these moonshots, and I understand that they are not really scientific moonshots or public health moonshots, but really about the competitiveness of Europe. And
yeah, that's why my question is like, what in the science of it you would find most promising for the formulation of the moonshot idea? You see what I mean?
But you know, coming back to the non-fragmentation idea, I think it should be, you know, pushing Europe to become a global leader in brain health innovation for global societal resilience, and this is maybe because, you know, what maybe we don't realize enough yet, or some countries already have strongly realized, in particular China, is that there are several rewards or several returns on investment from investing into brain health. So obviously, one is you know, reducing the burden of costs related to brain diseases, but that will take a long time. The second one is to you know, increase the brain capital. We've heard a lot about that, but that will take maybe a bit less time, but it will also take time. But one thing that could be a quicker return on investment is all the industries that emerge around, you know, enhancing brain health, and they will also improve the first two. And I think that could be an angle that could probably link to the expectation from those moonshots, from the sort of competitiveness.
Excellent, thank you so much. And Stéphanie Lacour.
So I think one suggestion could also be how to promote repair of the brain through biology, but also technology. And I'm actually convinced also that technology will probably be transient. So we can use technology to help activate some particular repair or prevent particular development of condition. And so I think they are also having a strong support for this dual aspect of using technology to help understand mechanisms and also drive solution to help the nervous system repair itself. I think this is also something that is not completely new, but I think we haven't seen it in action.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. I think these are very inspirational ideas, and I will be looking forward to what our innovation leaders make out of it in a short while. Thank you so much.